Not every missing person becomes a national story. The reality is some cases dominate national headlines for weeks, while others receive little to no attention. One term that explains this pattern is called the missing white woman syndrome. The term was first coined in 2004 by the late journalist Gwen Ifill and refers to the disproportionate amount of public interest and news coverage paid to missing white women as opposed to missing people of color.
In particular, it's the idea that young white girls and white women, often from high-achieving families or high socioeconomic status, blonde, fitting at least some definitions of kind of traditional attractiveness, those types of victims receive more coverage and are more likely to receive any coverage at all than other types of victims, folks of color, people from marginalized communities, etc.
That's Zach Sommers, a professor at the Chicago-Kent College of Law. He says public awareness of this term has grown over the last few years. He highlights the 2021 missing persons case of Gabby Petito, which dominated national news. Petito was a 22-year-old woman who went missing while traveling cross-country with her fiancé. The case generated intense media coverage and online interest, with news outlets and social media users tracking every development in real time.
There was just a volume that was different around the discussion of this topic beforehand. You had late-night hosts talking about missing white woman syndrome. You had blog posts everywhere, op-eds being written about it, social media covering it. And it was an idea that was out there. There were folks in the news world, academics, people who had loved ones who had gone missing, some law enforcement personnel who were aware of this idea, but it gained a footing that it had not had before that case.
Even Petito's father, Joseph Petito, spoke out against the mismatch in coverage between his daughter and missing people of color that received far less national attention.
Even in the moment, her family was saying things like, "This is horrific. No one should have to go through this, but there are lots of other people out there who don't look like Gabby who should be getting attention on their cases too." So Daniel Robinson was one of the other cases. He's a young black man who went missing in, I think, Arizona, who Gabby's family, her parents, her dad in particular, have tried to help shine a light on that case. It's still open. They still don't know what happened to him. He was a 24, I think, year old black man who went missing. So lots of other cases of people who didn't look like Gabby, who let alone not receiving that amount of news coverage, didn't receive any news coverage at all.
Unfortunately, this uneven coverage hasn't changed much in the 5 years since Petito's death. Cheryl Neely is a professor of sociology at Oakland Community College and author of the book No Human Involved. Neely breaks down what the term no human involved means.
That is an acronym, NHI, that police have used in their vernacular to describe victims for whom they feel have no value. The Los Angeles police, for instance, were known to use that terminology in describing the victims of Lonnie Franklin Jr., who was known as the Grim Sleeper serial killer in the 1980s in Los Angeles, California, South Central Los Angeles. So no human involved, that is a term police have used to describe victims they don't feel have value. These are murders with no human involved.
Neely also points to recent events that show how attention varies depending on who the victim is. She cites the deaths of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Pretty in Minneapolis. Both victims were white, and their deaths resulted in massive media coverage and protests, whereas the death of U.S. citizen Keith Porter Jr., a 43-year-old black man who was shot and killed by an off-duty ICE agent in Los Angeles on New Year's Eve, barely made the news.
Those cases got far more publicity, but Black people are victims of police violence all the time, and they don't get the level of care or shock or dismay that these killings have resulted in, and they are reprehensible. It is unacceptable.
To examine these patterns on a wider scale, Neely analyzed hundreds of newspaper crime stories. She accurately predicted the race of the female victim based on where the story was placed in the newspaper. What she found was that there was a greater probability that the victim was white if the story appeared on the front page.
If the victim's story also included a photo of the victim to humanize that person for the audience, then I could predict that the victim would be white. If the story was longer in length, meaning there was more detail about the victim and how people felt about the person, she was well liked, she was sweet, she was funny, whatever, the victim would be white. If there were multiple stories on one victim, the victim would be white. So overall, I found that stories that were more prominent featured white victims more often than those who were Black females.
Sommers says media coverage is largely shaped by higher-level executives and larger network decisions. Recent rollbacks in diversity, equity, and inclusion have led to fewer journalists of color in newsrooms across the U.S., which can influence which stories are elevated and how they're framed.
If you see someone who looks like you, if you have a newsroom that's completely made up numbers, right, but comprised of 10 reporters and editors and all 10 are white, they're probably more likely to bring in stories about missing white people or just even come across stories of missing white people because in their networks, on their social media, in their algorithms, those are the stories they're going to get presented to them. While I'm sure at times it is something more overtly nefarious, I think a lot of the times it's just a lack of representation in newsrooms and what white folks are kind of drawn to. And the fact that a lot of news organizations, most of them are for-profit, not all of them, but most of them are being driven by eyeballs and clicks.
And researchers like Neely say the effects don't stop at headlines and extend into how criminal cases are prioritized and investigated.
When police are indifferent, it emboldens killers to target particular victims. And in the book, I look at 7 different cases of serial homicide, and I do what I call a sociological autopsy of the investigations. And I show the egregious dereliction of duty by police officers who did not seriously investigate these cases, that were dismissive. They wouldn't even call these cases serial homicides, even though there were clear patterns that there was one offender responsible for these murders. And by not declaring it a case of serial homicide, they were not beholden to inform the community that there was someone stalking and targeting women in that neighborhood.
Sommers says the most common pushback people have about the term missing white woman syndrome is why researchers like himself downplay high-profile cases like the disappearance of Gabby Petito.
Why are you saying those cases are not important? And no one is arguing that any missing person case is not important. No one's saying that white missing people are less, that we should care about those cases less. This isn't a zero-sum game. It's an expansion of the pie. It's saying that, sure, we should care about Gabby's case. It's a horrific case, and no family should have to go through what her family went through, and no one should have to go through what she went through. But other people are going through that and not getting the benefit of that type of news coverage. So we should be expanding the pie there to ensure that the media coverage is representational there. This is not a commentary on certain cases being less important than the media makes them out to be.
All lives matter, and any imbalance in how these cases are reported and investigated ultimately factors into the final outcome. Cheryl Neely's book, No Human Involved, The Serial Murder of Black Women and Girls and the Daily Cost of Police Indifference, is available now online and can be requested through your local bookstore. To find out more about our guests this week, visit viewpointsradio.org. This story was written and produced by Polly Hansen. Our executive producer is Amira Zuberi. Our studio manager is Jay Silvers. I'm Gary Price.
The In Good Health podcast gives listeners the latest news on what's trending in health, science, technology, and more, featuring medical experts who break down complex topics in a way that's easy to understand.
The mice that ate the salmon that had been fed the soybean meal diet got obese. So it's not just what you eat, but it's what the thing you eat has eaten that's important.
The In Good Health podcast, available wherever you find your favorite podcasts and at ingoodhealthpodcast.org.